When you consume essential amino acids, it literally will help you maintain and build new muscle. And that is because of the degree of the muscle protein synthesis that it stimulates.
What is the value of protein and essential amino acids to the human body, and specifically, I guess, optimizing body composition and metabolic health?
I think the best place to start is just understanding what the role of protein is in our diet. So the role of carbohydrates and fat primarily, obviously the body's complex, there's a lot going on, but the primary role is as fuel. So we consume carbohydrates, we consume fat, we convert them into ATP, it allows us to move our body around. Protein can be used for that, but it's not its primary role, which actually has a lot to do with body composition, which I think we can get into later. But the primary role of protein is actually for it to be broken down into its constituent amino acids via the digestive tract, and then for those amino acids to go into the blood. And when they go into the blood, they don't get prioritized as fuel. Instead, actually, they get prioritized to help you rebuild the proteins in your body. So that's everything from your skin to your hair to your vital organs to your muscle. And the reason for that is because the way that proteins function in our body is that they have a certain half-life, you might say. Like they only last for a certain amount of time, and then they're damaged. They're no longer as functional as they once were. And so they break apart into the little amino acids. Some you pee out, and you need thus more amino acids and thus more protein to help rebuild those proteins in your body. So it's the role of protein is very different than carbohydrates and fat. That said, if you're not eating enough, you will actually convert more of the protein into an energy source instead, because your body's not prioritizing like building and sustaining muscle, right? Instead, it's focused on just trying to survive. So with that kind of fundamental understanding, then when you think about when you consume protein versus, say, consuming carbohydrates, there's actually a larger impact on your metabolism than there is just from the carbohydrates. I don't want to overstate what it is, but like if you consume protein, there's energy to break it down into the amino acids, and there's actually energy consumed to simply use those amino acids to help rebuild the proteins in your body. Whereas there's not as much energy expended in just breaking down the carbohydrates and turning them into fuel.
Is this what's called the thermic effect of feeding?
That is, yes.
Yeah, and it's way higher for protein than it is for...
Way higher for protein. So actually, the value of a protein calorie, or actually how many calories you actually... The real impact of the calories from protein is less than the calories you would get from carbs, even though they're approximately 4 calories per gram each.
And also there's this phenomena known as rabbit starvation, right? Like if all you did was eat protein, it's such a poor energy source that you would essentially starve to death, would you not? If you ate, if all you did was subsist on super lean protein and little else.
I'm not actually as familiar with the studies behind this. But it does make sense that fundamentally you literally would not have enough calories to keep supporting your body. On the flip side, there's been studies, actually ones they did with the people that were fasting in Northern Ireland and trying to understand at what point they would actually die. And the point at which they started to die was not from the total deprivation of calories. It was actually from the deprivation of protein. And this doesn't mean that one is true and the other is not. But what actually would start to happen is that when you deprive yourself of protein, what happens is your body prioritizes breaking down your lean muscle tissue to supply your heart, your liver, your kidneys, all these other organs with the amino acids that they need. So if you can only deprive yourself of protein for so long until you literally have no muscle tissue left, and to where at some point there literally are no amino acids available to help rebuild your vital organs, et cetera. And it was actually when they noticed that the EAA concentrations in the blood plasma itself had dipped below normal because there was no more muscle tissue to break down that people started to die.
Wow. Well, protein is an essential nutrient, and relative to our daily requirement for fats and carbohydrates, and there actually is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate, but relative even to our daily requirement for fat, I mean, we need way more protein on a daily basis. Like it's totally essential. What do you make of these headlines? There was an article in Vox that came out recently. It went super viral. I don't know if you saw it, but the headline was that Americans are already eating way too much protein. This obsession with protein is making us sick. Apparently, by the way, Vox is funded by animal activist groups. But yeah, what do you make of that assertion that everybody's already consuming too much protein?
I think I always tend towards nuance over like these kind of like soundbite type things. So what are they even talking about? Like how much protein are people eating? Like when they say too much, what does that really mean? Instead, why don't we actually have more like substantive conversations around it? It sounds like it's some kind of stimulating sensationalist piece that's kind of meaningless. I wouldn't really even pay attention to it. Instead, I'd say like, what does the science say after, decades and decades of research about how much protein we really need, and fundamentally actually how much essential amino acids we need, which validates the quality of the proteins that we eat on a daily basis just to maintain basic functioning. And then how much more do we need at different stages of life? If we're growing, if we're pregnant, if we are trying to lose fat but maintain our muscle, if we're getting older and our ability to break down proteins and synthesize new proteins is reduced, if we're training really hard. There's a lot of different cases and instances of that. So I'm imagining a blanket article. It's like Americans are eating too much protein is probably not really worth spending your time reading.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely more than a little bit of bias there. So walk us through the difference then between whole food proteins that you might ingest by way of beef, fish, chicken, eggs, tofu, and then protein supplements like whey protein, which I happen to be a huge fan of, even casein I'm a huge fan of, and then essential amino acid supplements.
So whole food protein is exactly what you think it is. It's like a piece of meat, right? Or tofu or chicken. That said, in a piece of, say, meat, they differ from each other in terms of what their composition is. On the number one step is just identifying how much protein is there relevant to other things like carbohydrates and fats. So there's going to be leaner proteins, meaning ones that don't have as much fat. But you can also think about it when you're evaluating plant proteins. While it may seem like it's lean, it could actually be packed full of carbohydrates, and you could be getting a lot less protein per gram of the total protein source that you're eating.
So like beans would be an example of that, where you're actually getting a ton of starch calories alongside whatever protein it may contain.
Exactly. So that's the first thing I think to understand when you're even just comparing proteins to themselves, whole food proteins. Then you need to look at actually what is the composition of those proteins themselves in terms of the amino acid profiles. So what we know now, and it's become much more apparent over the last 25 years, is that what really makes a quality protein is the concentration of essential amino acids, which are the part of the protein that make it an essential macronutrient. And that's because those amino acids you have to eat. Your body can't synthesize them. The other thing, though, that we've uncovered about these essential amino acids over the last 25 years is that they're also the active component of the protein that actually stimulates muscle protein synthesis. So the other amino acids can be used to help build the proteins in your body, but they won't communicate to your body to say like, hey, let's start building new proteins. Let's take the older ones that aren't working as well and rebuild them. Let's build more new muscle tissue. They don't do that. Only the essential amino acids do that. So then you'd want to be comparing the quality of the proteins themselves to each other based off that, not just the density, meaning how much protein is there per gram, but also what's the quality of those essential amino acids in them. And when you look at that, basically animal proteins tend to be way higher in these essential amino acids, and thus they're much more potent. And that doesn't mean that you couldn't only eat plant proteins, but you'd have to eat a lot more of them because they're simply not as potent. They have less protein per gram, and the actual protein itself is less potent.
Wow. So aside from the concentration of these essential amino acids relative to other nutrients, are we talking about bioavailability, digestibility?
That's when you get into the difference between, so that is very true in terms of whole food proteins themselves. So also in this case, it tends to be that animal proteins are more digestible, and the amino acids inside of them are actually more available than the plant proteins themselves. But where this becomes very interesting as well is actually when you start to talk about protein supplements. So oftentimes, I think people just think, I'm not getting enough protein, so I'm going to take some protein powder. And we'll just use the example of whey protein or whey protein isolate because it is the most superior protein powder that you could consume in terms of the concentration of the protein per gram and the quality of the protein in terms of the essential amino acid profile. Now, what makes this really interesting, though, is that the actual protein powder itself, 20 grams of protein from a whey protein isolate, is much more significant than 20 grams of protein from a piece of steak in terms of its impact on muscle protein synthesis.
Why is that?
The reason for that is because it is so much more immediately bioavailable. The actual protein and the essential amino acids in that whey protein isolate, we believe because there's none of the non-essential amino acids, which honestly aren't there are the non-essential amino acids. There are none of the other carbohydrates, fats, etc., especially in something like a whey protein isolate. And our body's ability to break it down and the actual peak levels of the EAAs in our blood. So we eat the protein, our body breaks it down, we get the essential amino acids, they enter our blood. They enter our blood much faster, and they hit these peak concentrations higher. So they stimulate a lot more muscle protein synthesis than, say, just a piece of meat will. And I think this is oftentimes overlooked, like even by big endorsers of like people who consume protein, that a protein powder supplement is distinctly different actually than the whole food protein itself. Now, that said, it's also isolated. It's a supplement, right? So it doesn't have all these it doesn't have the amount of minerals and other types of micronutrients that a piece of steak would have. So you can't say that it's the equivalent in terms of an actual nutrient profile, but in terms of its impact on muscle, in terms of its impact on muscle protein synthesis, and actually whole body protein synthesis, so the rebuilding of all the proteins throughout your body, the whey protein isolate has a much more significant impact than the meat itself. Now, here's something else really interesting, and we were talking about this right before the show. Anyone who really wants to geek out on this, I encourage you to look into David Church. He's kind of like one of the leaders in the field of a lot of these publications. And there's a 2020 article in Nutrients, which is the beginning of a lot of this more contemporary research that basically compared a mixed meal. So it's like 70 grams of beef protein as part of a mixed meal versus 30 grams of beef protein on its own. So no other foods consumed with it, versus 20 grams of whey protein isolate versus a certain amount of essential amino acids, which we can get to later. And actually the 30 grams of the whole food beef protein had a greater impact on muscle protein synthesis than the 70 grams of beef when it was consumed with other foods.
Fascinating. Why do you think that is?
Because it was able to be broken down by the digestive system, and the essential amino acids were more quickly available to the blood and thus to the muscle to stimulate new protein synthesis.
Wow.
And so then when you go to the next step to the whey protein isolate, it's much more significant than the beef protein or the whole food meal. I want to pause here and just say, in no way am I endorsing don't eat these whole foods, right? I would say like eat whole food, nutrient dense foods that are complex. They have a lot of other things going on in them other than just how much muscle protein synthesis or, whole body protein synthesis do I get. And they're also delicious, and they're part of a good quality of life. And when you look at the science, the whey protein isolate has a much more significant impact than these whole food proteins, and especially a mixed meal whole food protein.
Well, whey is so rapidly absorbed and digested.
That's fundamentally it.
Yeah. So like when you're eating like 70 grams of beef as part of a mixed meal with fat and carbohydrates, like even though the bolus of protein is larger, there are all of these other factors that are likely slowing down digestion. But maybe there's some benefit to extending out that infusion of amino acids over the longer term. But in terms of that acute spike, that acute rapid availability of essential amino acids, it's like you can't really beat a protein in isolation, I suppose.
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting argument around, is there benefit to a more extended release? It's like the core argument and theory behind taking a casein versus a whey protein for many people. That said, they've done multiple studies where they actually had people take multiple doses of the whey protein versus the casein, and you end up having kind of a similar response ultimately if you dose it out in these different ways. On top of that, I think another thing that the research has shown more recently is that what's most important is that the spike in muscle protein synthesis lasts like more than 3 hours. And that's why fundamentally, we can talk more about it later, but like why BCAAs in isolation have been proven to be so ineffective and a waste of money. They create this spike for like half an hour or an hour, and they decrease rapidly because there's not enough of the other essential amino acids available to sustain the muscle protein synthesis for hours. So when you actually look at the graphs, I can share them with you afterwards, or I can just share the articles with you. You can actually see how much the mixed meal beef protein stimulates muscle protein synthesis over this extended period of time. And basically what you see is this longer kind of slower slope and then decrease. But actually when you compare it to the whey protein isolate, you do get this much bigger spike, but then even the lower part of the slope doesn't decrease that much more than the whole mixed meal of the beef. So it's not like you're getting that much more benefit from it from a pure muscle protein synthesis perspective. Again, it's not like there's a lot of other good things in the beef.
No, of course, of course. But it's like your total body muscle accrual is this. It's the net, I guess, result of that dynamic process of like muscle protein synthesis versus muscle protein breakdown. And you eat a bolus of protein, you're in net muscle protein synthesis, but then inevitably after a certain period of time, I guess 3 hours, then you end up coming back to baseline. And when when that peripheral essential amino acid availability ceases to, when those essential amino acids cease to be available, then you enter that muscle protein breakdown state. And so that's when it becomes really, that's when like this like protein distribution throughout the day and having an even protein distribution and making sure that you essentially always have amino acids available for that, muscle protein synthetic effect becomes really important with regard to certainly maintaining, but ultimately building muscle.
I think that's especially true in contexts where the people are less active or they're older. Because again, we're going to get into like such nitty gritty science around this. And I think there's so many different studies and so many different ways to look at it. But if I'm like crushing it with resistance training, I'm just doing like lots of intense resistance training and I'm timing my protein intake perfectly before and after it. And then in addition to that, I go through some periods of fasting for multiple hours. Through the combination of those two activities, will I ultimately will I have like net muscle protein synthesis? Will I end up be building more muscle than I lost because I trained really hard and then I fasted? I mean, in some way you probably will. Like it'll depend on how much training you're doing and how much protein you're eating. But I think the simpler way of thinking about it is, if you do just eat protein every few hours, then like you don't really have to like worry about it. Eat protein every few hours and you generally do some resistance training, like you're gonna live a long, vibrant, happy life with muscle. That said, I think as you get older, it becomes that much more difficult to digest protein. It becomes that much more difficult for your body to want to build muscle. It's true for men and women. It's really significant for women, basically perimenopausal and postmenopausal women. So in those contexts, it becomes that much more important to not mess around, to not like skip protein meals. So I think that there's nuance in these things.
Yeah, definitely. While we're on the topic of whey protein, what about for people that have that claim to have sensitivity to dairy? Some people say that even without an overt dairy sensitivity, they sometimes have difficulty digesting whey protein. What is your take on that?
I'm obviously not that person, so I don't know their specific situation. I would say the vast majority of people I know that thought that was the case, and then they tried a whey protein isolate, which is virtually removing all of the lactose, their sensitivities are no longer there. And I'm personally someone who, I try not to eat too much dairy, like especially like the quality of dairies, I can really feel the impact, and I have no negative side effects from taking a whey protein isolate, nor do most anyone I know.
Yeah.
So,
and also sometimes it's not even the protein itself, but the additives in the product, right?
Yeah.
So like products like, it's comparing apples to oranges, sometimes comparing whey proteins to whey proteins. Like there are in some whey protein products, there's like myriad ingredients, when ultimately, like one of the things that I love about Kion is that it's essentially, you get a little bit of flavoring, you get some maybe sunflower lecithin, or, as like I don't know what it is, like an emulsifier, and then the whey protein itself. But a quality whey protein doesn't need to have more than 3 or 4 ingredients in it.
It doesn't really need anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, to get the benefits from it. All the other things are somehow just additives, most likely to somehow improve the production process, because they're trying to mass produce something, and they're maybe trying to work with older raw ingredients. They're trying to work with product that doesn't taste as good initially. It's like a lower quality protein. You need to mask it. You need to get it to bind in different ways. Like if you're seeing tons of ingredients on a product like that, that's most likely why. It's just a lower quality initial ingredient, mass produced, and thus it's a necessity from the production standpoint to try to you have to add all this other stuff.
And we do a lot of education on this show about helping people better identify ultra processed foods compared to minimally processed foods. And I often get asked, well, isn't whey protein an ultra processed food? You couldn't, it's not like people are typically making whey in their own kitchens, although that can be done. But isn't whey protein? I mean, it's basically just it's a byproduct essentially of the cheese making industry. Like we actually have been making whey protein, not necessarily consuming whey protein as a supplement, but we've been making whey protein for millennia at this point.
We've been making whey protein for thousands of years, and we've been consuming it at least for a few hundred years. So it's not like some new thing. But
Right.
I really like this question about we're saying we value eating whole, less processed foods, yet you're also endorsing or speaking about how you take this protein powder. So don't those seem like those are, contradictory to each other? I think the point that I would highlight here is what is the purpose of that supplement, right? So if I eat a highly processed Oreo, right, it has almost no nutritive value for me. It's got chemicals in it to stabilize it. It's very high in sugar. It's very high in junk fats. It doesn't really have any protein. So basically, I am consuming this thing that's laden with like chemicals and has no nutritive value. Like, yeah, why would I do that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense to have some fruit. Like if I really I'm trying to tame my sweet tooth or get a little treat, like have some raspberries, right? Those actually grow from the earth. They do have nutritive value. They're full of different types of micronutrients. It makes sense to consume it. On the other hand, when you look at something like a whey protein is basically separated from the milk solids in the cheese making process. And so that's just whey protein concentrate. And then when you get to the whey protein isolate, they just separate further the basically the weight of the different molecules, but it's through a cold filtration process. They're not adding a bunch of chemicals or anything. It's literally through filtering. They're able to separate out the lactose, basically separate out the sugars and the carbs from the product. So yes, it's filtered down, but it's not some like bizarre, weird chemical substance, and it has real nutritive value. And we just showed that it can actually have more impact on me getting more muscle protein synthesis and having a better, longer life than not taking it. So it seems like a very different thing and conversation than an Oreo.
An Oreo is just pure energy, and literally like nobody is walking around energy deficient in 2024 in the Western world. I mean, we
That's a good catch. I said no nutritive value, and it has energy.
It has
That's
energy.
True. It does have energy.
It has energy, but most of us are living in a state of energy toxicity. When you look at statistics regarding metabolic health in this country, about fewer than 10% of people are essentially metabolically healthy. 90% plus have at least one indicator of metabolic distress. And so, energy is not something that we are wanting for as a culture. It's really, it's protein that I think people would be well served to consuming more of. I do want to get into essential amino acids, super, super important. But while we're on the topic of whey protein, any back of the napkin, like ways to interpret labels, just for people, I personally use Kion. I love Kion. I've used you guys for years at this point, but just generally, how do people like best interpret whey protein labels and the like to know that they're getting a quality product?
I think the first thing to look for is the ingredient panel. So just look at the ingredient panel and see what's on it. Typically, you're going to see like a whey protein isolate or a whey protein concentrate. If there's something like a sunflower lecithin in it, that's very normal. It's almost only the case in which you're going to be able to get the product, and it's part of the processing, but it's a very safe ingredient. And then after that, look at the flavoring. Like if you're concerned about flavoring, if you're someone who doesn't like artificial flavors, artificial sugars, or artificial sweeteners, then just look for that. If you're not worried about it, then don't worry about it. And then there really shouldn't be anything else in it. On the ingredient panel. One other thing is salt. We actually put a Himalayan salt in ours, and it is for flavor. That's why it's in there, because if you've ever had a chocolate chip cookie with a little bit of salt on it, makes it a little bit better.
It does.
Yeah. And then after that, really, it's looking at the nutrition facts panel. So it's, what exactly is in it. If it's a whey protein isolate, you're naturally going to see basically virtually no carbs. You're going to see less than 1 gram of carbs, and you're not really going to see any fat, and you should see a pretty high proportion of protein. One thing that does come up though, even on a super kind of clean, very minimal product like a Kion Clean Protein, is the total amount of product in the bag is different than what is like in the scoop. So like way it says, I can't remember exactly, it's like 23 grams, but it's 20 grams of protein. So like what is the rest? Well, there are other minerals that help make up this total the total powder that's not only the pure protein. And so that's normal. So I wouldn't worry about that if the actual difference of the pure volume is different by like 10%. That's actually a natural part of just like how the total milk solids basically come together. And then I just would not really accept anything else. Like just look for it to be really clean and simple. You don't need anything else.
Yeah. Now for people on a budget, I know sometimes you'll see whey proteins that come from grass-fed cows. You'll see them and then there are alternatives that don't. Is that, I mean, I value that you guys source your protein from grass-fed cows. I think it speaks to, animal welfare and the fact that these cows are likely not going through an industrial, CAFO system. But does that have any significant bearing on the nutritional value of the protein?
This is disputed. So I would quite simply say that it's disputed. I don't think there's a really clear answer to it. What I can tell you is that from someone who sampled like tens and tens and tens of proteins and tried to make a decision about this, about what direction we were going to go in, and looking at all the research and trying to decide, should we only go grass-fed, should we not? And particularly in an isolate form, right? Because they're actually processing down the protein and then isolating the protein itself, which could potentially be different than, say, the impact of that protein as a whole food in a piece of meat, right? There could be other things in that meat that I'm getting if it's not grass-fed versus it being grass-fed, where a lot of that could be processed out via simply the filtration process of getting to a whey protein isolate. What I can say is the flavor profile is significantly different. If you get the Kion Clean Protein unflavored, it basically tastes like milk. You can mix it with water and it's almost has no offensive flavor. If you get lower quality proteins, they taste pretty gross. Like if you get an unflavored one, which is another reason why they have to use like stronger artificial flavors, stronger sweeteners, because you're basically trying to cover up the taste profile of a much grosser tasting product. So I think what's likely to happen if you go for a higher quality protein powder is you are getting something that's going to taste better and that ultimately has a cleaner profile.
Yeah, which is important, I guess, for sustainability, right?
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
And I agree though too with just I think the overall stance of trying to move in a more regenerative farming approach to like how we work with the earth and how we eat and what we're doing. And it seems more like there are more sustainable approaches through grass-fed type approaches.
Yeah. I mean, typically when I think of the value of grass-fed, I think about it in terms of the fatty acid profile, among other things, but primarily the fatty acid profile of the meat that I'm eating. So like the fat on a grass-fed ribeye is going to be fairly dramatically different than the fat of a conventionally produced ribeye. I mean, first of all, we know that animals tend to store toxins in their fat tissue. We know that there's a higher proportion of saturated fat in the conventionally produced ribeye, that there's less stearic acid, which we know is neutral, if not beneficial from a cardiovascular lipid standpoint. We know that grass-fed animals are aggregating all of these important phytochemicals that have antioxidant value in their fat. That's why the fat of a grass-fed cow, of grass-fed beef, actually looks different. Typically has more of a hue, which is attributed, I think, to at least some degree of presence of carotenoids and compounds like that. But it's interesting to know that actually also changes the flavor profile of dairy.
Yeah, I think what you just brought up is the perfect case of why it's so much more important when you're eating whole meat. Yeah. Like if you're actually choosing between two different cuts of beef, the grass-fed option is naturally going to be quite a significant difference.
Super interesting. Okay, so let's talk essential amino acid supplements. Because I know that there is a lot of, I guess it's a fairly controversial topic, but there was very recently a wonderful review paper put out and consensus statement put out by the International Society of Sports Nutrition. And they seem to shine a very favorable light on these supplements. And you guys produce them, I use them. Tell me about essential amino acid supplements, the role that they can potentially play in one's diet.
So this position paper by the ISSN was, I think, such a big deal because for some reason there's been like these disputes about essential amino acids versus branched chain amino acids versus protein, particularly in the fitness community. But when you really look at the scientific community and you look at the last 25 years, it's pretty clear. Like the story is pretty clear. There's hundreds of papers demonstrating the use of EAAs versus whey protein versus whole food protein, just studying this. And so I think from the sports nutrition standpoint, for the ISSN to take a stand was just, I think, helpful for everyone to have more clarity about really what does the science say. And one quick note about, I think, the ISSN is that, I think people like to think or say oh, this thing has bias, that thing doesn't have bias. My general perspective is that everything has bias. I have a bias, you have a bias, every organization has a bias. More the question is, what is their bias? What are their motivations? Like, why do they want to publish these things, or why do they say these things? And to make it explicit, I think with the ISSN, you have a group of academic researchers, the leaders in studying things like creatine and protein and amino acids. They're working at universities. They're getting, a variety of grants from different types of organizations to study things. And so naturally their bias is they want to keep doing research. And they like holding each other accountable. They like kind of like arguing over stuff. But I think ultimately they really are pursuing knowledge, and there are going to be motivations with, if I get a grant to try to study something, whoever's paying for the grant is going to want me to study it in a certain way, right? That said, when you take the perspective of a whole group of academic researchers over 25 years and them trying to come to agreement, you basically blend together all of that research, right? You're looking at research that was funded to see what would happen if these things happened to old people. What would happen if people in the military took this product? What would happen if you deprive someone of calories and they took it? For a lot of different use cases. And I think through all of that, you end up with something that's I have a lot of respect for. So I just want to shout out the ISSN because I think the work that they do is valuable. And it's I guess I trust their bias and the way that it all blends together.
Yeah.
So going back to, with them, what are the EAAs and what does this mean? I actually think we could pick up from where we left with the whey protein. So in that same context where we're comparing the whey protein isolate to a whole food protein, the free-form essential amino acids are even more impactful. So much more impactful that with certain groups, they were 6 times more impactful than a whey protein isolate. So 3 grams of essential amino acids were the equivalent of 20 grams of a whey protein. That's a very significant difference. And so immediately you wonder, like, well, why? Why, if whey protein is already so much more impactful than even like a whole food protein, why would a free-form essential amino acid supplement be even more? The reason for that is twofold. Number one, it's the bioavailability issue. Like it is immediately bioavailable. You do not have to digest it. It just immediately goes into blood, and the peak concentrations in the blood are there at the highest, immediately. So their ability to stimulate muscle protein synthesis is that much more significant. And I would say with essential amino acids, it's not to the degree of resistance training, but you start to think about it in a more similar context. Like if I just eat some steak as part of a meal, it's not like it's helping me build and maintain my muscles. Like I need to do some training. Like I need to like lift some weights and then eat a steak. When you consume essential amino acids, it literally will help you maintain and build new muscle. And that is because of the degree of the muscle protein synthesis that it stimulates. So that is, I mean, in a nutshell, it's, if you have, a piece of meat as part of a mixed meal and you have free-form essential amino acids on a spectrum, they're on the opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of how much more muscle protein synthesis you get from the essential amino acids themselves. So that's the number one reason, I guess, of why they're so much more impactful.
But you're also not saying that essential amino acids are better than their whole food, I guess, analog, because again, whole foods have so much more, nutritional value, minerals, essential fats. I mean, there's just like innumerable benefits to consuming, the bulk of your protein from whole foods. But from a purely muscle protein synthetic standpoint, you're saying that the effect when comparing, I guess especially on a gram for gram basis, it's way higher with essential amino acids.
Yeah, it's something like 12 grams of essential amino acids is like 5 times the impact of 70 grams of meat in a mixed meal.
Wow.
I mean, it's like pretty significant for this specific context of building and maintaining muscle and whole body protein synthesis. And so yes, it's not to replace it. I think again, maybe we can move into the conversation a little bit more towards then, okay, so if it does have this specific use, like the specific mechanism of action and way that it impacts the body, well, then when and how does it make sense? If I'm already eating enough protein, why and how would I use this? And I think there's really specific therapeutic cases for it where you have specific goals and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and specific populations as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not necessarily the thing that everyone should do all the time or the thing that you should do instead of eating whole food protein, but that it can play a special role in your life if you utilize it in the right way.
Yeah, so let's go into that. Like, where do you see them as a supplement fitting into one's diet, assuming that the person is already consuming adequate protein to optimally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. But then also, I guess, in unique edge cases where people are perhaps like not able to consume adequate protein, where people are on in a state of calorie deficit, older adult populations, for example, maybe vegans. Yeah, let's go into those.
So I think the three most persuasive use cases are for weight loss scenarios, or some scenario where you're trying to cut calories. The second one is for athletic performance enhancement. There's very specific athletic performance enhancement. And the third one is going to be for aging. So in the weight loss category, and again, this is more recent research just from the last few years, but it's very consistent with the research that was previous. When they did a 5-day, 30% calorie reduction, they were able to show that you need a 3-fold increase in essential amino acids to have a net protein balance. So let's break that down. I'm like a 200-pound guy. If I'm exercising and doing things, I probably could eat 3,000 calories a day. Like my resting metabolic rate is probably like 2,100 to 2,200. But if I like train or go for a run or do something, it's about 3,000. So if I wanted to do a 30% reduction in that, like let's just say I want to get more cut. It's like I want to lose a few percentage body fat. And I want to really look cut for this event or something. And I would try to cut my calories by that 30%. That would look like. Is that 900 calories? Yeah. So 900 calories. So by cutting that 900 calories out of my diet, I suddenly need 3 times as much protein as I used to get. So if before, and we could choose how much protein I was eating before, whether it's 0.7 grams of protein per pound of body weight or 1. Let's just take it that I was eating 100 grams of protein before. I was eating about 100 grams of protein before. I now need to eat 300 grams of protein, the same quality protein. The reason why I say that is because for every gram of quality protein, about half of it is essential amino acids. If it's a whey protein, if it's beef, it's honestly a little bit less than that. So if I'm eating 100 grams of protein, I now suddenly need to eat 300 grams of protein while I'm cutting 900 calories out of my diet in order to not lose muscle during that calorie reduction. That is why historically people have just focused on like bulks and cuts, because like the amount of your diet that would become protein in order to get those essential amino acids is so significant. The reason for that is because naturally, when you're cutting calories, your body starts to think, I should use this protein and these amino acids instead as an energy source, instead of trying to help build and maintain muscle. And similarly, you're going through a stress response and your body is that much more kind of catabolic in general because it's just not prioritizing building and maintaining muscle. So for anyone that is trying to cut calories, either let's say you're a competitive athlete, or let's just say you're trying to lose that 10 pounds to look a bit more cut. And I think, I'm hesitant to weigh into this, but also if you're doing it through any type of outside manipulation, whether it's like through drugs or surgery or something else like that, those things are forcing you to consume less calories and you're going to have the same need for this increase in essential amino acids. That is a perfect opportunity to not feel like you have to eat 300 grams of protein. Instead, maybe you up it to, even if you upped it to 150 grams of protein, and that last 150 grams of protein you need to get as essential amino acids, you could get 75 grams from the essential amino acids of a supplementation. So basically, I think if we kind of make it more simple, I'm trying to lose some weight, I'm going to cut some calories. If I added 2 to 3 servings of essential amino acids throughout the day, like larger servings of it throughout the day, while also cutting my calories, I could actually lose 10 pounds of fat and maintain all the muscle.
Interesting. But 300 grams of protein as a goal, that seems like a lot. Like, don't you? I mean, even bodybuilders, I feel like they're, when in the depths of a cut, typically they're not going much higher than 1 gram per pound of their body weight. So if you're a 200-pound person trying to diet down, why would you think that you need why would you think that you need 300 grams of protein to maintain your lean mass?
So I think here's the core point, and I think at this level, we'll have to decide what is the fundamental amount of protein I would need. So if I weigh 200 pounds, how much protein do you think, and this is somewhat like there's a lot of different studies that show slightly different things. So as a 200-pound person, how many grams of protein do you think that I need to consume just to maintain my muscle? Not trying to lose weight. I just want to maintain my current weight, and I want to maintain my current muscle and my training. How many grams of protein?
Yeah, whatever the 0.72 times your body weight. So I mean that, and there's a range.
Yeah.
I think it goes from, and now we're going to switch over to kilograms.
Yeah.
I think it goes from 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight to about 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, which when you convert that over to pounds, is like 0.7, I think possibly to 1. So like 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of your body weight, which if, as a 200-pound person, I would try to be eating between 160 to 200 grams of protein a day.
Okay, so that's even higher than what I was saying before, right? So if it's literally just to maintain my current muscle, and let's take the lower number, 160 grams of protein. So I'm not even going up to the 200. That is simply to maintain my current muscle and my current body fat percentage, everything that I'm doing right now. I mean, it's assuming all other calories are constant, right? That's a much higher number. I was starting with just 100. So what I'm saying is with 160 grams of protein, now if I want to cut weight, but I only want it to be fat, and I do not want to lose any muscle or have no net protein synthesis loss over the period of that cut, what the more recent studies have shown is that the 30% reduction in calories required a 300% increase in essential amino acids to maintain that muscle. So to say like, hey, well, bodybuilders, even like when they're like, they're going up to 250 grams of protein, during a cut, the assumption is in a cut, I am going to actually lose some muscle potentially. I'm going to lose some fat and I'm going to lose some muscle. What I'm saying is if your intention is to not lose muscle, so what the more recent studies have shown is that if you want to not lose muscle and you only want to prioritize the loss of fat, then you have to increase this total composition of EAAs threefold.
Wow. That's a lot of protein.
That's a lot. So that's what I'm saying. So instead of eating that much protein, you could even just like keep your current protein constant and simply supplement with the EAAs during that cut phase.
So when then,
if you're trying to sustain the muscle, you may be comfortable. You may be like fine. You're like I don't want to take additional supplements. I'm okay if I lose some muscle during the cut, or well, also someone who's maybe 50 pounds overweight and like they're like I'm just gonna focus on just like trying to lose as much weight as I can. I don't care if I'm losing muscle. Then
and also 30% calorie cuts. I think that's a pretty big cut. Is it not? I mean, I forget. It's been a minute since I've.
I think that I could probably lose. Well, I mean, 900 times 7. So yeah, I mean, I could probably lose like 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds a week. I mean, that's aggressive, but it's not like I'm trying to lose like 5 pounds of fat a week.
Right. Especially the leaner you get, the more you do risk muscle loss. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. So how does one then figure out how to partition their daily essential amino acid needs between whole foods and essential amino acid supplements?
So I think it could be different depending on your context. The short answer I'll give is that you literally can take essential amino acids any time of day, as low as a dose as 1.5 grams up to 15. Now the research shows like 18 grams, which would be a pretty high dose.
Wow.
And you will get benefit. If you take it outside the context of exercise or outside the context of eating other meals, it's been a few hours since you exercised or you ate, it's going to create this muscle protein synthesis spike that's of the same sort as what you would get from actual training, but not to the degree of training, that will literally help you maintain and build more muscle. Or you could consume it actually with a meal. So what's interesting, this is newer to me, and this is actually me trying to understand some of these more recent studies and actually directly talking to Arnie Ferrando about that, who's the lead author on this ISSN paper, that actually you could take the essential amino acids right before a meal. So let's say you're someone who likes to drink tea or diet soda or something with your meal. Instead of that, if you replaced it with essential amino acids, it would actually stimulate muscle protein synthesis and enhance the utilization of the protein, the amino acids in the beef protein in the mixed meal. So you would get a more anabolic effect from the protein in the meal itself. So you can consume it when you're eating even. And think about it in that, again, it's not of the same degree as resistance training, but of a similar sort, right? You're actually stimulating this muscle protein synthesis to get better use of the whole food protein itself. You can take it before, during, or after exercise. And similar to other, fasting periods, meaning you haven't eaten in a while, you can take it right before you go to bed, and it'll create one more spike of muscle protein synthesis before you go to bed. So really, there's a lot of different ways you can use it. They're all good, and they all make sense in different contexts. And I think if you're in the situation though where you're trying to lose fat and sustain muscle, I would time it out likely between my meals, right? So if I'm going to have, 4 meals a day or 3 meals a day, like have it in between those meals to have more consistent spikes of muscle protein synthesis throughout the day.
I love it. I often take, you guys have, you have the drink mix, the drink powder, obviously, which I love, but you also sell them in pill form. And so oftentimes before I go to bed, I'll just like a handful, I think actually, and actually, now that I have you, now that I have access to your brain, I would love to know what you think about this. We often hear that you want to generally hit a leucine threshold of about 2.5 grams, so 2,500 milligrams of leucine, to, I guess, adequately hit that threshold by which you're stimulating muscle protein synthesis. So I actually will take, I think the serving size is 7 pills to get 2 grams of leucine. I'll take 9 pills to get that extra 0.5 grams of leucine. So I'll usually handful 9 pills of the EAAs before I go to sleep. Does that make sense? Does it make sense?
The 9 pills is great for you. It's not necessary. The more recent research has shown that threshold is kind of dependent on different types of protein sources and
interesting.
So it's more complex. So I actually think 1.5 grams of total essential amino acids have been able to show a muscle protein synthesis spike, which in our formula, which is based off the research, 40% of that is leucine. So you're looking at for 0.6 grams is significantly less, but that's what the more recent research has shown. I think that with one serving of 5 grams, you are getting a muscle protein synthesis spike, and you are supporting your body with recovery from exercise throughout the day. You're ensuring that you're actually building a little bit more muscle when you sleep. What I would say though is this is a lot, especially in a pill form, but if you upped it to the full 15 grams or even 18 grams because you train and you're active, you would get, at 15 grams, you would get 3 times the impact as the 5 grams. That would be 21 pills though.
Wow.
But if you took 21 pills right before bed,
it's a lot.
You would maximize the muscle protein synthesis that you would have while you were sleeping.
Super interesting. I really love that you guys actually lay out the specific, the concentration of each specific essential amino acid on the label, because not many brands do that. I think one of the biggest red flags for me on a brand is proprietary blends, and I super appreciate that you guys don't do that. Any supplement that has a proprietary blend on it and it says you're getting 2,000 milligrams of an essential amino acid blend, but it doesn't actually break down so you can see how much leucine you're getting. To me, it just feels like they're hiding something. I don't know. It's not I try to avoid brands that have proprietary blends. I like to know what I'm getting.
As a supplements insider, I think it depends on what the product is. I would say for amino acids, it's really important. I think it's one of those interesting things where it's people put together supplements with a ton of botanicals in them, and it's a proprietary blend. And it's I'm honestly, what do those botanicals actually do? Which ones? How much? What's going on? The studies around them are probably so varied. There's probably a case for a lot of different stories. With amino acid science, though, it's pretty clear. It has been studied consistently over the last 40 years now, the last 25 years. The formulations have gotten clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer about what you want in it. And it really is fundamentally to base the amino acids proportions on what exists in human skeletal muscle, and then to increase the leucine to 40%. And I'll make a note here why it's so important. And this is actually another reason I said it was twofold earlier, but I was probably talking too much. We like moved on past it. With the difference between whey protein also and freeform EAAs, in whey protein, it's a 27% concentration of leucine versus the other EAAs. In a formula like ours, it's a 40% concentration. That increase from 27 to 40% has shown a 50% increase in muscle protein synthesis impact.
Interesting.
So it's not only the bioavailability, it's actually by upping that leucine a little bit, you get a significant increase in the amount of muscle protein synthesis that you get. So anyways, you base it off human skeletal muscle, you increase the leucine, you increase the other two branched chain amino acids to match it in terms of their proportions, and you increase the lysine. And it's like study after study that they're doing for NASA, for the military, for the NIH, for private parties, and all of these researchers are utilizing the previous amounts of these amino acids to base their studies to get the impacts that they are seeking, right? And to show that it actually works, and it's publicly available. So why would you not just use the formulas that are publicly available and then just say what it is?
Yeah.
Whereas like if there's no good reason to not.
Yeah. So for the general population, essential amino acid supplements, super useful in terms of, getting obviously a higher level of these amino acids into your periphery for a muscle protein synthetic effect. But what are the populations for whom this kind of supplement might play an even more useful role, right? It's like, I think we've already touched on the aging populations, people for whom, maybe sick people who don't have a large appetite. Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah. So quick tangent on athletic populations. They're really impactful. Like the degree to which they will increase the amount of muscle protein synthesis that you get purely from the exercise that you're doing, improve the amount of endurance that you have during that period, and improve your recovery is very significant, and it's more than protein or anything else you're going to use.
And when should people take them in that context? Like post workout?
Taking them before the workout will maximize the amount of muscle protein synthesis. You're basically combining the impact of the spike from the EAAs themselves with the resistance training.
Wow.
Particularly with resistance training. But it's also beneficial to take during. It would simply improve more of like, it's not to the same degree, but it's still beneficial. And if you like it and it helps you hydrate yourself, it's still good. And also afterwards, there's a great impact. But before you get the greatest bang for your buck.
Is there any necessity for taking them on an empty stomach, or can they be mixed as part of like a pre-workout?
They can totally be mixed as part of a pre-workout.
Wow.
Yeah, if you like them.
Yeah.
But let's move on to aging. I think because like athletic populations get a lot of attention in terms of like using supplements like this. With aging, really the older you get, the greater the benefit you're going to get from this type of supplement, which I think is like actually not that uncommon for a lot of when you think about dietary supplements. Like when you're younger, your body is more resilient. It's more able to recover from different types of things. It's better able to use different types of nutrients that are introduced into it. And as you get older, your body simply doesn't like work as well as it used to work. And one of those, or two of the core ways that occurs, and that's relevant to essential amino acids, is that your body's ability to digest protein gradually reduces. It's simply not as effective at breaking down the proteins into the component amino acids. But even more importantly, your body doesn't prioritize using those amino acids to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, which generally kind of makes sense. It's like as you get older and older, is my body, even from like an evolutionary perspective, thinking like, I really need to like build and get strong and stay super active so I can go like hunt when I'm 80. Like it's not thinking that, right? Yeah. It's thinking I'm going to be more, I'm going to move less. Other people are going to do things for me. I might not even have survived past this age in previous generations. And so the body is simply not prioritizing utilizing those amino acids to build muscle.
Yeah, I think from an evolutionary standpoint, all according to, like for example, I think it's called the grandmother theory of aging or theory of longevity, that all that we are essentially meant to do in our golden years, so to speak, is to look after the young of our, to look after our grandchildren, essentially. So yeah, you're right. It's not necessarily for the foraging, for the hunting. It's to be caretakers, essentially, for our youth.
That said, we now live in a different world where many people, including myself, I aspire to like hike when I'm 70. I want to go I want to go swim laps in my 80s.
I want to be Mark Sisson.
Yeah.
Who's now like in his 70s.
Yeah.
Still kite surfing every day or doing whatever the hell he does.
Exactly. And being able to have the physical vibrancy, which I think fundamentally is going to be a mix of like your cardiovascular health and your muscular health. Like, do you have the strength and are all your tendons strong enough and not just your muscles to actually move and perform these actions and to avoid injury and to, you know, be vibrant. So in order to get that, you're going to have to probably take a different approach than you took when you were 25 to get there. And what we have uncovered, again, over the last 25 years, is that as we get older, these impacts that we're describing earlier about, like, say, hey, the free-form amino acids versus the whole food protein versus the whey protein, those differences become significantly exacerbated. And that is because, again, as I'm saying, your body simply is not prioritizing it. So utilizing essential amino acids to actually help you just maintain your muscle mass 35 and on is going to become progressively more and more and more and more important. The other part of this too is that as we get older, our metabolism typically doesn't function as well. And so you're kind of inclined to eat less. Your hunger may not be there as much, but also you're inclined to eat less because you're going to store more calories. You're going to end up storing more fat, and like you're trying to manage your weight in that way. And so I think just the importance of resistance training as we age, and the importance of actually taking a supplemental EAA daily, purely to actually maintain your muscle mass and even potentially build it as you age. It's not just like, oh, it'd be cool if I lost 10 pounds so I could like look cut for the season. It's like, no, so I can not fall down and get hurt.
At what point do you think this, from an aging standpoint, like I'm now on the wrong side of 40, 41, and my diet is very protein centric. I eat a ton of, red meat, chicken, fish, eggs, things like that. But at what point should listeners really start to consider this from a longevity standpoint?
I think the first answer is like when you notice it. I mean, I think like in lots of cases, we're always looking for someone else to tell us like, like what we should do and when we should do it. But I think naturally we can observe our own bodies and we can tell what used to work for us versus what works less maybe now, and how our body composition is changing, et cetera. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that from the actual research literature, it basically starts at around 35. On the other side of 35 is when progressively your ability to utilize these amino acids decreases decade after decade. So what I would say is that for someone who's in their 20s, early 30s, an EAA supplement versus, say, a protein powder is going to be like 3 times as effective, basically. Once you hit 40, 4 times. 50, 5 times, 60, 6 times, 77 times, roughly. And that's like me, that is me summarizing a lot of the literature and a lot of studies, but it's roughly about that amount of impact. So you can just tell that by the time I'm 40, I'm like, wow, I get a lot more from this essential amino acid supplement. I get 30% more value from it than I did 10 years ago. Whereas when you're 50, you're going to get, almost double the impact of what you got from when you were 30.
Wow.
So it just progressively, gets that much more important as you age.
So what's a good starting regimen then for somebody looking to experiment with these? Like, would you say 1 serving in the morning, or like what might that look like?
I would start with 1 serving per day, and I would think about the time of the day when you're consuming the least amount of protein. I think that's the first place really to start and to look into, because you're going to ensure that you're not going into net protein loss during that period, and you'll likely experience the mood benefits and the energy benefits, because these amino acids are the precursors of your neurotransmitters. You'll experience more of like the satiation that you get from consuming protein, and so it's a nice way just to kind of fit it into your day. The other answer I'd give is like, when can you get yourself to start taking it? Like, we can always debate about like, you should be training this many days and you should be eating this. And I'm like, what can you actually get someone to do? So if the easiest thing for you to do is just to take a scoop or take a few pills first thing in the morning, or the easiest thing is right before you go to bed, then do that. But I think in this context, you have the information now to know like it can be useful during a low protein meal. It can be useful when I'm not eating. It can be useful before exercise. But it's also very useful first thing in the morning or before you go to bed. So it's really like, when can you get yourself to actually anchor that new behavior to something that you're already doing and be consistent with it? Because that's really where you're going to get the benefits. It's not like you're going to take this thing, you're going to take anything one day,
Yeah.
like, and suddenly your whole life's going to change, right? It's not like you go to the gym one day and suddenly
Exactly.
you can do everything. Like you go to the gym a few days a week for a year and you're like, oh, wow, like that's crazy. Like, yeah, I'm stronger. I can lift more stuff. Like, oh, my body looks different. So I think it's a similar outlook to that.
Yeah, consistency carves mountains. My dad just turned 74, and he doesn't eat breakfast. When he does eat breakfast, it's like a bagel. You know,
He should take this
yeah,
first thing in the morning.
like in the morning. Yeah, because also the overnight fast, you're definitely in a state of net protein, loss.
Yeah.
Like first thing in the morning.
Yeah. Which again, going back to the conversation earlier, it doesn't mean like never let that happen. I mean, like old school bodybuilders maybe like eat chicken every 3 hours and wake themselves up in the middle of the night and make sure they have casein right before they go to bed. But for most of us, it's okay to give your body a rest and to be in a net protein loss during that period. It's just, what are you doing during the other parts of the day? Are you doing things to ensure that you're ultimately in net protein positive throughout the course of the day, throughout 24 hours.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Anything else you want to add to the conversation? I feel like this is fascinating, and I'm super excited to be able to offer my audience, a protein masterclass, which I feel like we offered them the first time you were on. I feel like you're like a walking encyclopedia article on the benefits of protein and amino acids, But yeah, the floor is yours. And also, I just want to say that people can go save 20% off of anything that you guys produce at getkion.com/geniuslife. Again, like I've been using your protein for years. I'm a huge fan. And the essential amino acid supplement is bomb. Tastes great. Also super easy to integrate. But yeah, anything else you wanna leave us with?
I would just say thanks, man. I like what you're doing. It's awesome that you want to have these kinds of conversations and that there's actually a format to have this kind of conversation, because I think the things we're talking about are really important to people. They're a little heady, but hopefully we talked about it in enough of a context and with like the right kind of language where people can really engage with it, because I think these are the types of things that can really change people's life. And you do a great job of just keeping things simple. It's like, I saw some post you did recently about like how be ripped or whatever. And it was like, but it really is that simple. It's like going to the gym, it's eating this much protein. It's just keeping things simple, but keeping it still science-based. And like, I think you just do a great job of it. So I'm grateful for you and for the platform and for being able to educate people about this.
Thanks, man. Tons of people liked that post. And then I got like a handful of commenters saying, why should I listen to you? You're not lean and jacked. I'm like, what are you it's like people are so insane online these days. Yeah, I just can't sometimes on social media. But I'm glad that it's resonating with at least some proportion of people out there,
Well, that's what it's about, man. It's like you're not in it for the haters, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're in it for like the people that are
exactly
that are enjoying it, and that like literally if someone takes one thing from this conversation today and they implement that in their life in a consistent way, and 10 years from now, they're like healthier and happier. Like, dude, that's it, man.
That's it.
That's it.
That is it.
That's it.
100%.
Yeah.
And also, like, so much goes into whether or not a person is. First of all, I don't know if people know this on social media, but I am, like, I've been training my whole life, but like, I'm past 35, at which point it does become somewhat more difficult to accrue muscle, even though I would say that I'm in the best shape now that I've ever been in. I'm the most jacked that I've ever been. And that's, and I feel very proud of that. Not that, it's my hobby. It's not like something that I put too much of my self-worth into, by the way. But yeah, like also, there's like genes play a role, hormones play a role. There are so many factors that go into, and the vast majority of people that do look lean and jacked on social media professionally, like they're augmented, they take performance enhancing drugs, so many of them, even people that don't cop to it. Like I have friends that are regularly shirtless on social media. They look fantastic and they don't admit to it. They don't cop to it on social media, but they're on TRT and the like. So yeah, I think that there is people have way more latitude than they often give themselves credit for in terms of what they can potentially achieve with their bodies, were they to just put in the time, dedicate the consistency, have a little bit of patience, and yeah, having access to super high quality products that make it easy to hit those protein targets every day. And when you're not able to hit the protein targets, or even when you are, to then augment with essential amino acid supplements. I think all super great, super helpful, useful tools to have in the toolkit.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Getting good tools for your toolkit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very important. Well, Angelo, thanks for coming out.
Thanks, Max.
Yeah. Again, people can go to getkion.com, GETKION.com/geniuslife. And Kion's all around social media as well. I know you guys are, very responsive. If anybody has any questions, you guys have great customer service. So people can go and check you out there. And thanks for flying out.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.